The House is set to vote on a short-term fix to extend the government's ability to avoid a default. But it's only enough to keep the government solvent through December 3rd. Democrats are hoping that's enough time to pass the president's social and climate plan. Earlier, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki downplayed House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's comments that the party needs to make difficult decisions to meet the demands of moderate senators to shrink the size of the bill.
It's not a cut just because someone once proposed something bigger on paper. It's not a bill or a policy that's going to change lives if nothing is passed. And that's what we're working through. There's a lot of ways to do that, and that's the discussion she's having with her caucus, and the president is, of course, playing a prominent role in.
Psaki said President Biden will meet Wednesday with officials from major U.S. ports and companies like Walmart to discuss global supply chain bottlenecks. The supply disruptions have led to lower economic growth forecasts worldwide. On Wednesday, we'll also be getting new inflation numbers. They'll help us understand whether rising prices will fade away or if they're sticking around. Plus, CBS News has a new poll from Virginia's race for governor. It shows a narrow 3-point lead for former Democratic Governor Terry McAuliffe over Republican Glenn Youngkin. Let's dig right into the numbers with Anthony Salvanto and Ed O'Keefe. Anthony is CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, and Ed is CBS News Senior White House and Political Correspondent. Welcome. It's great to talk to you both. Anthony, Virginia is a state that went for President Biden by 10 points less than a year ago. What has changed?
Well, it's a lot closer now, Elaine. And let me show you, when you talked at the outset about that 3-point lead, that's down from the margin that Joe Biden won this by at 10 points. Now, the electorate's going to be different, but the big thing here is if folks want a window into national politics, I think you can get it in Virginia. And here's how. When we ask people what is motivating their choice, what is important to them, look at these differences between if your big issue is vaccines, how to handle COVID, vaccine mandates, with which most people, most likely voters in Virginia support, those folks are going for McAuliffe. But if your big issue is Virginia's economy and who might create more jobs, there we find voters going towards Youngkin. And so I think those issues that, look, everybody in America is talking about are really focused and really coming into play in this election. And then I'd add this, Elaine, when you look at the way in which national figures, namely Joe Biden right at the outset, is figuring into this. Of course, he's not on the ballot, but he's central in the campaign, right? Among Youngkin's voters, they're very motivated to vote because of their feelings about Joe Biden. You've got this 58% majority who say that, and that's even more than the Democrats who say they're motivated to vote because of Joe Biden. So it's not the Democrats are turning out in force to support the president, but as often happens in an off-year election, it's that party that didn't win last time that feels like they get a second shot at this, so they start getting motivated and turning out, and that's what's happening on the Republican side in Virginia right now, Elaine.
Really fascinating to see. So, Ed, Anthony touched on it there, but why is there so much focus on this race? And how much can one state actually tell us about the country?
Well, there usually is in the Virginia governor's race or the New Jersey governor's race in the year after a presidential race, because they're the only two states that hold gubernatorial races in an odd-numbered year. California, of course, held a recall election a little earlier this year, but that's kind of an anomaly that we can set aside. In this case, Virginia often can be a better barometer of how national issues are playing, in part because that state's economy, more than most, is influenced by national issues, given that so many people in the Old Dominion work for the federal government or for the U.S. military, or used to, and are certainly attuned to it. And given that Northern Virginia, the much more urban reach of the state now, is so heavily influenced by what's going on in Washington. So we've seen this before, whether it was during the Bush years it went Democratic, or whether during the Obama years it was always a race that was influenced by the results of the year before. In this case now, you're seeing a tick-tock tight race here, and this number will be a big factor. 52% of the state disapproving of a president that they elected to the White House by 10 percentage points last year. It shows you that especially among independents now, who are, according to Anthony's polling, favoring Glenn Youngkin, are breaking away from Democrats and breaking away from the White House. And if that were to happen, if this were to be a race that was won by strong independent support for Youngkin plus juiced Republican enthusiasm in a state that Democrats believed that over the past 10 years they had successfully turned into a Democratic stronghold. It's going to cause alarm bells to go off across the country in tight congressional races, in Senate races that have similar demographic makeups, like down in North Carolina, or perhaps as far south as Georgia, out to Arizona, and in other places as well. So a lot of interesting findings here. These are, to some extent, consistent with what we've seen in other surveys recently, but confirmation that this remains a race that is incredibly close and is going to require both Democrats and Republicans to bring out all of their voters. It's part of why just today the McAuliffe campaign has announced the First Lady is headed to the Richmond area on Friday. Former President Barack Obama will be in the state campaigning with Terry McAuliffe, and other surrogates that can help draw out African-American and women voters, like Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, and Stacey Abrams, the former gubernatorial candidate from Georgia, both of them going to campaign with McAuliffe as well to help motivate black voters, women voters in key parts of the state.
Right. That movement, though, among independents that you pointed out, Ed, is really going to be something to watch as the dynamic continues here over the weeks. Well, Anthony, early voting has been underway for about a month now. What do we know about who has voted and what's still to come?
Yeah, and this picks up on the point you all were just making about motivation. One of the things we've seen lately is that Democrats like to use mail balloting and early voting to turn out their base, right? So there's one part of it where you look at the early returns here, and this is the independents that you all were just talking about, so I'd echo that point. But the early returns on early ballots, we don't know who they voted for, but we can look at how that's building up. Well, this line chart will show you this is what's been turned in so far. And you see this line looks kind of flat, right? It's not really gaining any steam right now. Look at that compared to, this is the line of how things went in the run-up to the 2020 election when Joe Biden won the state comfortably. That early vote, which, again, more Democrats like to use, really took off. Like, it's got that sort of rocket ship takeoff there. That's the kind of thing I think Democrats, if they're, trying to motivate their base, they want to see that pick up steam. And also in the polling, we're told by Democratic voters that they are saying they're going to vote early. Now the question's going to be, can they actually do it? So it's really a lot of that going on. And then the other thing I would add is enthusiasm is always a part of that, especially in an off year, when millions of people in Virginia aren't going to vote the way they did in 2020, at least not at the moment. Well, the very enthusiastic favor the Republican right now in the polling. By 50-44, the Youngkin voters say they're very enthusiastic about turning out. That's always an added component. A lot of people do it out of habit, out of duty, out of motivation by the party. But this is one of those underlying things that really could make the difference, Elaine.
So many fascinating things in your poll. Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much. Ed O'Keefe, please stay with us because we also want to bring in Eugene Scott and Eliza Relman. Eugene is a national political reporter for the Washington Post, and Eliza is senior politics reporter at Business Insider. Welcome to you. So, Ed, after a standoff, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell worked with Democrats to get to today's vote on the debt ceiling, yet it fails to solve the fundamental problem of addressing it long term. What are some things that could happen in December when this fix expires?
Oh, gosh. I mean, you have not only the possibility of the debt limit expiring, but you have a government shutdown that could occur starting December 3rd, which is why they've set up all of these deadlines to sort of hit back to back in hopes of compelling lawmakers to get together and cut a deal so that the holidays at least can be salvaged. But it is an incredible period of churn right now as we try to watch Democrats come up with a way to cut a deal on not only the ambitious Biden agenda, but then the basics, the things that they should be able to do on a regular basis, home maintenance, things like raising the debt limit and keeping the government's lights on. And so, over the course of the next several weeks, I think we're going to see a lot of continued negotiation between Democrats, especially on this. It's part of the reason, frankly, why Terry McAuliffe is suffering in Virginia. He has said as much, that the lack of action, the lack of passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill, for example, has potentially helped drag down his numbers. And if that's the case, we'll see whether the results of the elections in early November have any influence on these broader talks.
Well, Eliza, division within the Democratic Party still threatens the president's spending plan. Here's the House Speaker on the next stages in negotiations.
We have some important decisions to make in the next few days so that we can proceed. I'm very disappointed that we're not going with the original $3.5 trillion, which was very transformative. But in the whatever we do, we'll make decisions that will continue to be transformative about women in the workplace. So I'm pretty excited about the prospect that we have to make some difficult decisions, of course, because we had fewer resources, but nonetheless, no diminishing of our commitment to a transformative agenda for the children.
So, Eliza, where are they looking to make cuts?
So, as Speaker Pelosi said in that clip, there are some mixed messages coming right now. It's unclear exactly what will happen with this bill, but they'll likely have to both cut spending from many of these initiatives and also, decrease the duration of some of them, how long they last. So originally, this bill was, a $3.5 trillion spending bill over 10 years, but they're likely going to have to cut that by probably half, at least $1 trillion. Senator Manchin has said, he only supports $1.5 trillion in spending. Biden has suggested something around $2 trillion. It's unclear where Senator Sinema stands. So it's looking like, there's going to have to be cuts across the board. But progressives have said that, they don't want to pit certain initiatives against each other. And they're also very intent on funding, green energy to fight climate change. So there's a big line item for spending on subsidies for green energy and public transport, and that sort of climate initiative segment of the bill is really top priority. So I expect that there will still be very significant funding in that area, and then probably cuts to many of the slew of initiatives that are in there right now, from the child tax credit to the Affordable Care Act and Medicare and Medicaid. They were planning really big expansions for all of these things, so they're likely going to have to scale it back across the board. But this is an ongoing debate, and it looks like some moderates and some progressives are at odds over where they want to cut.
All right, we'll continue to see how that plays out. Meantime, Eugene, the Washington Post is detailing the president's dropping approval numbers among key constituencies, writing, quote, "In some sense, the benefit of the doubt portion of Biden's presidency is over." Do we know what sparked these groups to lose faith in the administration?
Sure. Well, part of the frustration among Black voters, Latino voters, some younger voters has been frustration with President Biden for not being more aggressive in moving forward with trying to pass legislation and get policies in place via the filibuster. We know that Biden campaigned promising to be able to cooperate and work with those on the other side of the aisle, in part as a reversal to what happened often during the Trump administration, where we know the former president could not find that many Democrats to move his agenda forward. But people have been upset with Biden for having such confidence in Republicans and even some Democrats when it comes to trying to get his agenda passed. And many of these people, Black voters, Latino voters, are individuals, younger voters who have goals and dreams and ideals for the Biden administration that they believe can't be passed without a filibuster, and have been upset with the president for not seeing things the same way that they do.
All right, switching gears, Eliza, you wrote about Congressman Adam Schiff's new book for Business Insider. Schiff characterizes FBI Director Christopher Wray as, quote, one of the few remaining agency heads appointed by Trump who was still willing to speak truth to power. What does Schiff base that assessment on?
So Schiff was referring in this section of the book to Wray's, well, he described Wray's integrity and was referring to the Schiff, basically Wray said that in one of his first meetings with Schiff, likely shortly after Trump nominated him to be the FBI director in 2017, Schiff told him that he didn't need the job and he would resign if he ever felt pressured to do something that, quote, wasn't right. And Schiff talked about an instance in which Wray said that if a public official or a campaign is contacted by a foreign government or an agent of a foreign government, that they should report that contact to the FBI. And, Trump had said publicly at the time, this was in 2019, that he wouldn't necessarily report a contact like that to the FBI. So he was, referring to Wray sort of standing up to Trump, but not necessarily directly contradicting him, and said that he admired that strategy of, him being able to sort of, stay true to himself and speak truth to power, but also not, undermine his standing in the administration.
Interesting to hear that assessment, particularly from Congressman Schiff. All right, Eugene, the conservative think tank, the Claremont Institute, issued a statement Monday defending their employee, former Trump lawyer John Eastman. Eastman counseled the former president and vice president on a process by which Mike Pence could overturn the election results. That memo is now public. How is the Claremont Institute trying to explain Eastman's advice?
Well, they're arguing, on what looks like a technicality. John Eastman, a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute of conservative think tank, advised Mike Pence to rely on Congress to make a final decision about the election. In a technicality, and in a detailed explanation, he made the argument that there was a way to legally get Trump elected and remain in the White House despite the fact that the votes were not there in terms of the Electoral College or the popular vote after the November election. And he is, as a result, being accused of trying to overturn the election. But the Claremont Institute is saying that's not what happened. He just advised Pence on a different legal theory that some scholars were saying fell within the possibility of what was possible when it comes to the election. And the reality is, to many people, it just seems as if Eastman and the Claremont Institute are trying to get out of doing what it is that Eastman appeared to be doing, which is encourage Mike Pence not to move forward with certifying the results of the November 2020 election.
All right. On that note, Eugene Scott, Eliza Relman, and Ed O'Keefe, thank you all very much.